Hi, and welcome to another show on the Modern Ancient. That's what this show is officially called, is the Modern Ancient. And today we're talking about is serfdom, or more or less working class servitude, humanity's default. Because throughout history, one of the things that we've seen is that there has been a very large body of working people, people who, more or less are making, day to day, like living paycheck to paycheck in a sense, but spending most of their lives working, most of their lives uh, working and giving the fruits of their labor to some type of higher class, right? Either noblemen, governments, some type of ruler in some way.
Would you like a definition?
Yes, let's do it.
Serfdom was the status of many. Let me start that over again with the microphone aimed at me. Serfdom was the status of many peasants under feudalism, specifically relating to manorialism and similar systems. It was a condition of debt bondage.
Mhm.
Debt
Wow,
bondage
interesting.
and indentured servitude, with similarities to and differences from slavery. So the discussion today is, where are we in America today, and where is humanity overall in terms of servitude and in terms of indebtedness?
Right. Well, and talking about it more or less as a, is this some sort of default for humanity, or is something else possible? Because I think when many of us, especially the younger generations, because I think that there was this perpetuated idea that if you worked hard, you went to school, you got a good job, you could stay in that job for the rest of your life, and you would have this deeply meaningful, deeply happy life. Okay, well, that's not true.
Good luck with that
That's a
one.
straight
Whoa.
that's an absolute lie. And as we went through the processes, we checked all the boxes, we did all the right things, we ended up finding out that it's actually not a quality of life that's really worth much of anything, and it's not a quality of life that allows for freedom of self-expression, for happiness, to even raise healthy and happy families. And so we're looking at, and especially over the last 3 years, over what has happened. I don't know how much we can and can't say on YouTube, so we're going to keep it a little bit of a, like, a moderate type conversation in that way. But people are very willing to hand over their power fundamentally. And why is that the case? Because isn't it the case that you would like to be free, right? We have the land of freedom here. But in the land of freedom, we regularly hand over our freedoms. And in many other places where we have democracy, freedom is handed over freely. Why is that?
This is such a big topic, but
Mhm.
let's dive in anyway
Yeah.
and see if we can make some sense of it. Let's go with what's going on in America, because that's what we know the best.
Right.
We've got 340 million people who live here, and 100 million people are in poverty and or live paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
They're heavily in debt. I think the average indebtedness is $15,000 for every. That's on average
On
for every
average,
American.
yeah.
What we know is some people have a whole lot higher than that, paying 26% interest on that money annually,
Yeah.
and they can never get out.
Right.
Okay, is that servitude? Is it indebtedness?
Yeah. Is it debt servitude?
Also, what does it mean when we see homes in jeopardy, apartment condos in jeopardy, and people lose them, and who buys them?
Institutional investors. So
Institute.
institutions, BlackRock, etc., come in and buy up houses, and in many cases keep them empty to drive up prices in that area.
What we have is a population of renters,
Mm-hmm.
which means they're going to rent for their entire lives. They're never going to own it.
Yeah.
And we know that the number one way that people gain wealth and pass wealth is through their house.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not part of a normal conversation that people talk like that, but that is the reality.
Right.
You talk to leading economists, and they all say, well, this is obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, if you're looking at it, it is obvious. However, how many of us look at it that way?
Well, and it's the biggest store of value that most people will ever have. The land, the land and the house that they own is the biggest store of value. And many people over a lifetime are able to pay off a house. And because, and obviously it's different parts of the country are very different, or different parts of the world are very different in terms of real estate prices. But it's true that real estate prices, especially as, inflation and all of that has grown, real estate, especially here in the United States, has gotten very, very expensive.
We could compare it to Poland too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Poland. Yeah, absolutely.
A house that when you were a little girl was $15,000.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been 100,000 here because it's really very nice.
Yeah.
Is now $150,000.
Right. Or more.
Maybe it's more. I haven't checked on it.
But so fundamentally, we're looking at the issue of why do human beings allow this to happen? Because I think if you look around, the majority of people are giving away their rights, they're giving away their freedoms. And we watched that over the last few years, where more or less most people, especially in the Western world, but this is also true across Asia, and there are other places as well, but people more or less just said, well, for safety, we would like to give up our freedoms. Governments didn't, for the most part, have to force that on people. People chose it. And I want to look at fundamentally, because if you're watching this, you're probably somebody who is sort of an outside of the box thinker, right? So somebody who probably thinks way more than maybe the people around you do or your family does. And you may look out and say, how is this allowed to happen? Why are people like this? And you may even ask that about yourself. Why am I like this? Why am I willing to give up my freedom for comfort or the illusion of safety and security? Why do I want to give it to somebody to take care of me and make my decisions for me? And so that's really what we're exploring right now, is why is that happening? Is that fundamentally part of human beings, or is that something that is changeable, or can humanity grow out of more or less being infants? Because when you look at what stage in life is that the most important? When you're a child. It's most important when you're a child to have somebody tell you what to do.
Your survival might, well, let's not say might.
It does
very
depend
likely
on it.
your survival very likely depends on it. Let's go all the way back in this thing.
Okay.
And you say, well, how hard is it to get anything of substance done? You go, well, it's actually pretty hard. One thing, you have to know where you're going.
Right.
You have to make all sorts of decisions about it. You have to get people to go along with you. You have to find the resources for it.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, that's complicated.
It is. It is.
And people who get involved with these things, they have endless frustration. They have meaningless meetings, endless. They have to try to get everyone else to go along with it. And at the end, they say, can't we just have a dictator do it? Now, they don't say the word dictator, but it's
Right.
an administrator, a boss. These are not dumb people. This is
Right.
the reality that they face.
Well, so let's dive into an example of this, because I think that part of the answer to this is that we have a societal structure in the Western world that allows itself towards having serfdom, because that is beneficial to the people who have put these structures in place. And they've
Right.
been in place so long that we've all forgotten that there was any other way to live. And that's fundamentally what I want to bring up here, is that there are other ways to live than the ones that we currently are using. But because we humans have relatively short lifespans, let's say you're lucky and get 100 years, these things were put in place long before you got here.
Right.
And they hopefully will not be in place after you go, but we haven't been here that long. So your father, my grandfather, he worked in the same company for his whole life.
His entire career.
He was at one company. And that's passed down. That is a thing that happened long before I was born. He gave his entire life, the best years of his life, to one company. The people who work at that company probably, number one, aren't alive anymore, and no one remembers that he gave his entire life to that company in exchange for, comfort and security. But more or less, that's what he spent his entire life doing.
And he often spoke about security.
Right.
You need the security. Granted, he grew up during the Depression
Right.
in the 30s.
Well, and so there is a genuine need for security that human beings have. Because if you are not physically secure, if you don't have food to eat, if you don't have a place to live, if you don't have clothes to wear, if you don't have fundamental needs, your life is at risk.
We keep going back to this. This is complicated.
Yeah.
And to try to come up with some simple, mindless answer isn't going to work.
Right.
How come the vast majority of people are employees, not bosses?
Right.
How come?
Well, I think for a couple of reasons. First of all, we don't seem to have here any type of training or any type of will as a society to become any kind of real leader. And so I'm going to foundationally start with school, because my wonderful fiance talks about this. He says school is for reading, writing, and arithmetic. And as long as school teaches you reading, writing, and arithmetic, that's all it was meant to do. And he and I fundamentally disagree on this, because although it is stated that school is supposed to teach you reading, writing, and arithmetic, it has a responsibility to teach you other things too. And fundamentally, what we have is a school system that was designed to produce workers.
Yes.
It was designed to produce workers and employees, specifically factory workers. If you go back to when school in the iteration, because there are many different types of educations, school in the iteration that it's in right now, which many people don't know, there were actually other versions of school before this.
Yeah.
In this iteration was actually designed reading, writing, and arithmetic, because a factory worker would need to know how to be on time, would need to know how to follow instructions, would need to be able to read, would need to be able to do simple mathematics. So you look at what we have, and from a very young age, we're sending our next generations, just as we were sent to basically a factory to teach us how to be good employees. What does it not teach you? It doesn't teach you about taxes. It doesn't teach you about mortgage, how to buy a house, how to buy property. It doesn't teach you how to think for yourself. It doesn't teach you how to think freely. And interestingly enough, people's favorite teachers are always the ones who challenged them to think for themselves.
Yes.
Who challenged them to be better than they thought they were. Those are people's favorite teachers. And the ones they hated the most were the ones that were the most stickler to the rule. You have to sit here.
Comply. Yeah, it continues to be internal conflict and confounding. There's a part in every one of us that's one that rebels against authority.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not news to us.
Yeah.
And we look at people who are authoritarian over us, and we at minimum resent them.
Right.
No, at maximum, it's a lot worse than that. But then at the same time, we go get jobs under those people.
Right.
We work for those people. I saw a fabulous BBC documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they were doing is they were looking at high-level management and their happiness and their health.
This was so fascinating.
This was excellent. Then they took a look at, as things went down, the less power and authority, and the more people had to comply, the less happy they were, the more depression and anxiety they experienced, and the more cancer and heart disease they experienced. Yeah. They lived shorter lives, and they wished they weren't here.
Yeah.
Going, does that tell the story or what?
Well, I mean, imagine that your entire life more or less is dictated by somebody else. What time you get up, what time you get somewhere, what clothes you wear, what you're allowed to say, what you do during the day. even to extent, if you get, your lunch or whatever, if you eat it at the cafeteria, whatever, what foods you eat are dictated by somebody else. So what chance do you actually have to express who you are in that circumstance,
or even find out?
And typically they're the least paid. They are the most heavily worked. And it's very interesting. There is, and this is where I think that the very beginning of that upbringing with school and with parental and societal figures saying children must be seen and not heard. You cannot, kids don't really have, any autonomy to figure out who they are in the system that we have right now. And I think that serves the people at the bottom the least, because they are the ones, more or less, that they give time, effort, and energy. And the majority of whatever it is they produce actually goes to other people. And, it was one of the biggest eye openings to me when I learned that that money does not actually equal how much work you do. And I didn't learn that, I think, until I was like later in high school, because I sort of thought that like you had to work really hard. But then I met a lot of people who were wealthy in the school that I was in, and they didn't work hard at all. Some of them didn't work at all. They were living off of trust funds, or they were living off of investments, or they were living off of parental, great grandparent, great whatever. And I was like, this is not actually related at all. And so people who are working the hardest, their reward for their hard work is not equal. The reward you get in life is not equal to what you put into it in terms of working hard. But isn't that the lie? Isn't the lie that you go to college, you get a good job, you work hard, and you'll be successful? That's the lie.
Among many lies, but that certainly is a core one in terms of your own serfdom. And now we have, don't think, you remember the study where they interviewed a bunch of college students, and the college students wanted to end free speech.
Oh yeah, okay. So let's dive into that. Actually,
I mean, you talk about serfdom. You talk about being controlled, and those people, this is supposedly our intellectually elite. They're going to college. You have to question that, but they voted. If they had the vote, they would take away free speech. And when someone did do free speech, a bunch of people went and demonstrated and said, "No, you're not allowed to say that."
College is a very interesting thing, because I remember being in college and remember thinking that I had all of the answers for all the world's problems. And the college professors facilitated thinking that. They facilitated thinking that, we all as 18, 19, 20-year-olds had all the solution to all the world's problems, right? I remember thinking that they were sort of feeding that to us.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. College has become, and it was when I went to college too. I don't know if it was when you went to college, but it really was a center for us really thinking that we knew everything. And it wasn't actually until I got into, it was my degrees in global business. So it wasn't until I got into the business school, and the professors that we had were CFOs of companies. And so once we started getting CFOs or CEOs or CTOs in as our professors, all of a sudden that really shifted for me, because the focus was now on what is the reality of a situation.
Yes.
Because a good CEO, a good CFO is looking for the truth of a situation, not some airy idea of what might fix something, but what in reality is the answer, even if the answer isn't pretty. And so I am very grateful to the university that I went to for hiring adjunct professors that were in the industries that we were looking to get into.
Yeah. They bring real life to the situation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because real life happens, you get out into life and it is not what you expect. You are completely underprepared, and it hits you like a ton of bricks, and you think you're alone. You think you're the only person in the world that it hits like a ton of bricks, but it hits us all.
I can't tell you, I've been inside 100 companies doing
Mhm.
consulting work. And I lost count as to how many CEOs said, I feel so alone in this
Yeah.
job. And it was like, there was, even their executive team, they were alone because there were a bunch of tigers on the team,
Yeah.
not a bunch of people cooperating. Remember when President Xi Jinping of China, he put together a new staff after he got elected for his third
Yeah.
term.
He just ousted another one. He recently ousted a defense minister.
Oh, I know that. I
Mhm.
But the point is, he received such criticism because he selected a B team, not an A team.
Yeah.
Then we did an analysis of what the A team was. They were all tigers. They all wanted to be the new president or premier of China. They were not going to cooperate with him. And he had to have a group of people to get something done.
Right.
So you could say, well, he could have picked the best. For getting something done, he probably did pick the best.
Yeah.
And I don't doubt that it's every group of people like that, the contention inside the group. And you say, well, then some strong leader shows up and everyone starts to back down because they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's too frustrating and too harmful to them. Then you go, no wonder people go to serfdom.
So let's dive into that for a moment, because I think that this is a twofold problem. The first fold is that we have made our lives so complicated that it is actually very challenging to get anything done in the
Yes.
world, whether you are an employee or a boss, whether
It's true.
it is very, very hard. And the only way we're being told to get out of how challenging it is to become so wealthy that we sort of transcend these problems, right? You don't like flying a commercial, which no one likes flying on commercial airliners. No one likes that because it's a miserable experience. Okay, we'll just become wealthy enough to fly private.
Yeah, good luck.
Right? So instead of fixing the problems that we have, overall people are especially in the Western world, are working towards, how do I become wealthy enough to transcend this problem? Okay. So here's a problem with that. And that's part of what the study that you were talking about is the Buckley Institute poll. So 51% of college, according to this Buckley Institute poll, 51% of college students supported campus speech codes, which means that, only this is appropriate to have conversations about, and this is not appropriate. You can't talk about this.
And so whoever has the most power gets to dictate what those rules are. And so free speech isn't free speech anymore.
And there's a fundamental misunderstanding that human beings have, that they think that their ideas are their own. So especially young people, right? Young people all think that they're the only people to have ever had this unique idea that no one has ever had ever before. Okay. Many other people have had that idea before them, but you don't have the reality check of, actually your idea is not new and it may not actually be that great. Okay. So, and fundamentally, we all think this. We think we're the first ones to ever have this thought, or the only ones to ever have this thought. And then if you look at the things that people are thinking about, more or less, they fall into maybe 5 categories.
Yeah.
And so it's not unique at all.
Right.
And they did, it was actually one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. So, and this was years and years ago. I wish I could find it. But what they did was there was a study done where people were taken on a car ride before they had to go to, a lab and draw a bear. And I think it was a bear that they had to draw, like a teddy bear. And what the people had done is they had put up billboards, and the taxi that people were in followed the exact same route past all these billboards to get to the office that they were going to draw the bear at. When all of the participants got there, the bear that they drew was almost identical to each other, because they had passed enough subliminal messaging on those billboards on the way there that their bears all looked the same. And so we think that we have no outside influence in the things that we're thinking, and that's fundamentally untrue. We are all more or less watching the same commercials. We're
Yeah.
driving by the same billboards. We're hearing the same things that come out of politicians' mouths. So we actually have very few different inputs coming into us. So our thoughts are not our own. That's actually one of my areas of specialty in terms of study is in covert techniques like that.
Yeah.
Covert techniques to influence people, because our thoughts are primarily not our own and we don't know it.
Well, if they listen to this show, they're going to know it.
Yeah. And if you're interested in that, dive a little bit more into covert influence techniques in advertising specifically, because advertising is blatant about it. How many ads do you remember from when you were a kid? To me, it is actually unconscionable to program advertisements into children, or frankly into adults, because that's what they're doing, because you will remember that for life.
The father of behavioral psychology in the 30s did all the right research, figured it all out, then went to Wall Street,
right,
and worked in business and became wealthy.
Yep.
And going, they've had it for almost 100 years.
They've had it for almost 100 years, and they didn't tell you. They didn't tell you. And in many cases, do you know how many times I've heard, oh, hypnosis doesn't work. Hypnosis is a crock. You can't put someone into trance. Human beings are naturally in trance a large portion of the day. You naturally get into trance when you start watching TV, which is why TV ads are so effective, is because you're already in trance. And when you're in trance, you are substantially more influenceable than you are if you have your guard up, you have your cognitive ability up, you are in front, you're not observing life, but you're really participating in life. But as soon as you get in front of the television, you become very susceptible to influence. Now, what do we have in front of us all day, every day? We have screens. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 screens in this room.
Yeah.
Alone. Now, knowing that when you're in front of a screen, what you have is trance, what you're in is trance, and you are more easily susceptible to information, knowing that that's the case, influence is everywhere. And by selling our information, more or less, social media, every place you go on the internet has enough information about you to really target what they're trying to sell you. And you think
This
it doesn't
is so
work,
easy.
but it does work.
I've been involved with clinical hypnosis for 50 years.
Yeah.
And I've had people say you can't do it. And I say, okay. So in one sentence, I do it.
Yeah.
They just are stunned.
Yeah.
Because I manipulated them in one sentence into a very different perspective.
Yeah.
I say, that's how easy it is. And this is how it's happening constantly.
It's happening constantly.
And then you hear the words like, well, what about your liberty is at risk? What are you talking about?
That's the thing. The only way to
You've just gone into a trance.
Right. And the only way to control a population is by letting them think they're free. And so that's what we have here, because try spending a day without your phone.
You're
Try
right.
spending a day without your computer. Try spending a week without social media. So try spending a week without turning on the TV. And you sit there and you say, well, okay, so what am I supposed to do for that hour? What am I supposed to, is that freedom? Is that freedom? It's not. But because you have the freedom to put your phone down or pick it up whenever you want, you can close the screen or open the screen, turn off the TV or turn it back on whenever you want. It's the illusion of freedom. But really try and take yourself out of that environment and find out how hard it is. How free are you really from these things?
And so you're controlled by some entity or entities that you don't even know exist.
Well, and
they're good at it.
They're masterful at it, because I think there's a saying that goes, the best thing, or it was like the worst thing or whatever that the devil ever did was to convince humanity he didn't exist. Right? So to convince you that you're free because you have the ability to put down the phone whenever you want, or the ability to close the laptop or whatever it is whenever you want, it puts you in the illusion that you really are in control. And I think that that's part of what's happening here, is that people have the illusion of freedom, the illusion of control. So they don't push for real freedom. If any of us ever knew what it felt like to really be free. And I think that's another reason that people don't fight for it, is because what it feels like to be free right now is it feels like a ton of work.
Oh,
It feels like being in a complicated world where there are no answers, really. And you more or less have to trial and error your way through massive complexities with unreasonable goal standards. For all of us to be wealthy, for the thing that most Westerners are aiming for, is billionaire status. Because that's the point where you really get to do what you want, is you get to be, when you're a billionaire or multi-millionaire, that's when you get to be free. That's when you get to do what you want. And that's when you get to be happy. That's an impossible goal for most people.
and you have to question whether it's worthwhile, the
Right.
prices you pay to get there. You know, one of the things every time you and I talk, no matter what it is, whether it's on
Yeah.
this show or someplace else, we talk about the concept of radical responsibility
Yeah.
and how easy it is to blame other people rather than just own it yourself.
Yeah.
And how many times in your life has your father talked to you about this? Can you count that high?
Oh, radical responsibility. Yeah.
The power position is I own it.
Right.
But what's the number one thing people do? They blame
Blame.
other people.
Yeah.
It's not my fault.
Right.
It's somebody else. And if nothing else, you can blame the boss,
Right.
or you can blame.
Right. You can blame the boss. If your life sucks, you can blame your boss. If your work sucks, you can blame your boss.
Also, it absolves you of the responsibility of figuring out what it is you want to experience while you're here.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a serf. I
Right.
don't want indebtedness. I don't want to be answerable to somebody who makes no sense
Mhm.
or just wants to lord over me.
Yeah.
And I mean, lord over them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't like any of those things, but you mean I have to do something about it? You do.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this we're really aimed at. What can you do? And we keep coming back to the same kinds of themes. It's radical responsibility. So if you're going to, first of all, you have to have an awareness of what's
Right.
going on.
Right.
And I think that any number of people we're being lied to constantly.
Yeah.
We're being manipulated constantly. We are being taken down a bad path.
Yeah.
And I don't know what percentage of people that is now, but it seems to me it's way over half.
It's growing, and trust in mass media has declined substantially. So the latest research on that is that people are really waking up to the fact that more or less we're being lied to pretty consistently.
And how much faith do people have in the Congress, for example?
Very low.
I think it's 17% of the people approve. Going, these people keep doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because what would it really take to make that system different?
Yeah.
Oh, movement.
Massive overhaul. Yeah.
Massive overhaul.
Yeah.
And it's going to require leadership of a lot of people and a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that means you have to give up a whole lot of your time, effort, and energy to make that happen.
Right.
People say, let somebody else do it. Now you're a serf.
Yeah.
Now you're not going to own a home. You're going to pay for rent forever. You're going to pay exorbitant taxes and get no return on it. And it's at every level.
Yeah.
You're going, here it is. So we keep saying this is complicated.
It's complicated, but the folly in it is this, because, it's very interesting over the last 3-ish years. Very many people just sort of handed over their freedoms and freedom of movement, freedoms in many, many ways. And one of the things I heard the most was, I'm so glad to stay home. Because most people at that time, before we entered into that, were beyond exhausted, right? So going to work every day, commuting is terrible.
Yes.
Sitting in a car in traffic from anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour for most people, sometimes 2. So you spend a large portion of your waking hours during the day sitting in traffic.
Yes.
That is a horrible way to live. Okay? So people were commuting. They were burnt out. Most people hadn't taken a vacation in God knows how long. And then the vacation they took was a couple of days or a week. So people were more or less too exhausted to do anything. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't, okay? Very clear. But I am looking at the circumstance that was the case before this happened,
Yes.
because the circumstance was bad already. People were more or less cubicle workers before this with very low quality of life.
Right.
And there are other places in Europe where that is not the case. Like, there are places in Europe where that's not the case. There is like a pretty decent work-life balance, but in the US that's not the case. In the US the work-life balance is abysmally bad. And that's why we just had the United Auto Workers strike. And they, to their credit, and it's interesting how many people really supported United Auto Workers, because the big auto manufacturers were making billions of dollars off of them, off of their hard work. And they hadn't really received many price increase or pay increases, none of that, but their hard work was generating billions in profit for these companies that they were not investing back into the people who did the work. So there is that sense that people are starting to wake up to, the business that calls you family isn't. And so the problem though with handing over your power to somebody else is that they don't care about you, and they don't actually care about your well-being. Now, when you did that as a child, when you handed over your power as a child to the adult caretaking you, in unfortunately many people did not have a healthy upbringing, but ideally that was meant to, because the person cared about you and that person would take care of you. So a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, caregiver, right, would take care of you. And so fundamentally, internally, when we feel that vulnerable, we say, I'm a child, please, person above me who cares about me, please take care of me. The problem is the person that is above you as an adult is the government who doesn't know you exist, is your employer who doesn't care about you at all and would fire you in a second if it was in their best interest. So we're taking a fundamentally very young part of our humanity and attributing it to the wrong people. We're attributing it to people who don't care about us fundamentally. And so that's where you get the results of that, where people are being taken advantage of in mass.
En masse.
Because,
you can't say that strong enough.
right.
And you say, well, we need to fight capitalism. That also that's more than we're going to get into today.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what to do about this.
And if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm looking at the chat. I see you guys in the chat. If you have any questions, let us know.
Because I understood radical responsibility
Mm-hmm.
before you were born, you got exposed to it from the word go.
Right.
And I also had already come to the place of people need to find out what they're about.
Right.
Because something is in them that wants to express. Whether I see it or not see it, they want to do it.
Yeah.
Whether they know it or not. I also knew that giving advice, controlling a child, you give them guidelines, and that's what you got.
Right.
You got guidelines, not manipulative parents. They didn't have all the answers for you. Among other things, I'd already come to the decision that, or the observation, I didn't have solutions.
Yeah.
You grew up in a world different from the one I grew up in. And as observant as I was, I did not have solutions for what you were facing.
Yeah.
Among very many other things, you're a girl and I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew you had different challenges. And so coming from that position is the way to start putting children in a place of, you own your life.
Right.
This is all about you doing what you want to do here. And I don't need to approve. I don't even need to have an opinion on it unless it's going to hurt you.
Right. Right. And fundamentally, parents are there to make sure that a child is, number one, a functioning adult, becomes a functioning adult.
Right.
And number two, that the child doesn't get hurt.
Right. And it's like when I talk to parents about this, these concepts are brand new to them.
Mm-hmm.
Even the concept of radical responsibility. You own everything that happens in your life. You get the consequence no matter what,
Right.
no matter who's to blame. You still get the consequence. And come to the understanding that the only powerful place to live from is I take responsibility for everything that goes on in my life, the good, the bad, the ugly. I own it. And I think it's the only fostering that position is really the only way to overcome serfdom, because
Yeah.
we're headed we're already in it.
We're already in it. We're in it. You were born into it. I was born into it. We were born into that circumstance.
I think that it's no question about it. At least 100 million Americans are serfs.
Probably, I would
I'd say it's double.
Yeah, I would say it's double
Uh,
in one sense or another, because to me, the definition of serf is somebody who works, and most of what they work for goes to somebody else, and that's most people.
That's most people. Yeah. How do billionaires get to be that way, on the backs of other people?
That's exactly, and so that's a really important piece of this is, we all want to get to that level, but I think fundamentally most people are not able to take advantage of others the way that billionaires have tended to. While Jeff Bezos basks in his luxury, there are people who work for him who can't afford a place to live, right? Who have to have roommates, and they work full time.
Right.
And so, that to me is an unacceptable way to be. I could not do that. That's not part of who I am fundamentally. And I actually think it's not part of most people fundamentally to take advantage of others in that way. And I think that comes from a real sense of, I've been taken advantage of. I know what that feels like. I could not perpetrate that on somebody else. To know what it's like to not have enough money to buy food, I would never perpetrate that on somebody else.
Especially an employee.
Especially someone who is dedicating the best part of their life to your company. So to me, one of the ways to pull your life, to be more in control of your life, is partially what's happening right now, which is the labor market is saying, all right, look, we can't live off what you guys are paying us. And so the best people, the most competitive people, are actually able to go and get better pay, better benefits, better working life, better balance. But there's a large portion of people who really still are kind of doing like the fundamental grunt work, who don't have that as an ability. But partially the labor market, especially during the COVID years, the labor market was a little bit more in charge. The other way is entrepreneurship, which is what I've obviously chosen. So I think that it's a phenomenal way, and it's not right for everybody. Entrepreneurship is not right for everybody. It is very hard. It is for people who are willing to take radical responsibility, because it's very challenging.
One of the things we were doing, we did some consulting projects in companies that said internal entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And well, the theme of that was, no matter where you are, you're looking out for your own best interest first.
Yeah.
Not the companies first, you first. Now, you're certainly going to do what it takes to shine at your job or be valuable to the company,
Mm-hmm.
because it serves you. You're not here to serve their purposes. You're here to serve yourself first.
Right. And not in a selfish way, to be clear, not in a negative detractory way from anybody.
This isn't about steal from the company.
Right.
This is about you're checking out your opportunities, your quality, where you can go, and if this company doesn't give it to you, you go someplace that it does, and then you go someplace else as a stepping stone. And there was great ideas, but the follow through on it was staggering. And to get people to actually start paying attention to what's good for them, that was really hard.
Well, it's because fundamentally, societally, we're not taught to do that. In fact, we're taught that if we're selfish, then that is like the epitome of evil, right? Is to be
Right.
selfish, which isn't necessarily wrong if that's the context. If the context is to harm other people, that absolutely, I agree with that. But it's the empty cup, because a lot of people understand you can't give from an empty cup. So if you don't fill your cup back up, you can't give to anybody else.
Right.
Let's take a question. Army with Harmony. I see that. I see you. And I think I saw you on Geopolitics and Conflict on Tuesday also. If I understand correctly, are we not in a crisis phase of history? How do we change the cycle?
Oh, what a good observation.
Yeah.
I think she's exactly right. And when you go from one system to another, there's this jagged line.
Yeah.
It's up and it's really rugged. When the Soviet Union became the Russian Federation,
Mhm.
oh, that was ugly.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the people suffered terribly. It was that jagged line.
Yeah.
Well, our hope is that based on the amount of information that's now available to people, and the dissatisfaction and the awakening that's going on,
Yeah.
that this jagged line is going to go to a better place.
So there is a phenomena that's been thrown around that it actually only takes 1% of a population to change the course of that population. So it's an interest in meditation. I think it's 7%. But the point is, it's actually a very low percentage
Yes.
of people actually need to change in order for an entire society to change. And that's so the other part of the question is, how do we stop this, or how do we change for the better? Because the end of empires, the crisis part of the cycle that you're talking about, is typically very bloody, is typically a very unpleasant time in history when many people lose their lives and many more lose their quality of life.
What's Dalio's first name?
Ray Dalio. Yeah, Ray Dalio discusses this. So the answer to that, though, is that there are a lot of people who are waking up to this right now.
Yes.
And I do have a lot of faith and hope in that, because the people who are waking up are doing something about it. There are a lot of people who are very actively speaking out against the way that things are going. And it's been very interesting watching the Israel Hamas Palestine
Yeah.
situation unfold, because the world is watching, and very many people are stepping in and saying, this entire situation is not okay.
A lot of governments are stepping in.
Right. And governments are stepping in and saying this situation is not okay. Now, granted, it is still messy, but I think it would be substantially messier had it not been in the eyes of the world. And the overwhelming sentiment, not from the United States government, but the overwhelming sentiment is, this must stop and we need peace.
Right.
And we're also hearing that about the situation with Ukraine and Russia, is that many other countries and governments are starting to say, even in Europe, are starting to say, we do not want this, we need peace. So that gives me a lot of hope and faith. What would I think solve this crisis is, first, if multipolarity was embraced. So if there was a willingness to share global resources, global profit, and global power between more or less the world.
Yeah.
That's a hard sell, because the people in power want to keep their power. But the people in power are few and we are many. And the many doesn't understand that we're actually the ones with the power. So if the many wakes up and says, what I really want actually is a better, more peaceful world, that is how this changes. There would need to be even a small but a small but vocal group of people that stood up and said, we're doing this differently. We want to take responsibility for our lives and for the way that the world goes. What we would like is a more moderate, more humanity centric way of doing things. And we don't have to agree on what that is.
Right.
But fundamentally, there's a live and let live. Let's share power, share resources in a way that fundamentally takes care of humanity. I think that's how we solve this.
And we're even seeing major powers in the world that have gone that direction.
Yes.
The United States is not one of them.
Unfortunately.
But the hope here is there's actually a viable third party emerging, political party that espouses these kinds of values. Mm-hmm. And we'll see how that takes off.
There's something that I always say, because I heard this in college, I think for the first time. I was a freshman in college, and there was a girl who lived in my dorm who was a very militant Democrat, very militant Democrat. And she went around asking everybody who they were voting for, right? Which, you know, as an adult, you learn that that's really not, if you want peaceful relationship with somebody, you don't ask them what their political
There's a bunch of people, right? That's the top of the list.
Right. So she went around asking everybody. And if somebody said the candidate that was there, I think it was John Kerry at the time, but if somebody said something different than Kerry, she would absolutely blast them if they were Republican. And she would say, if you were voting for whoever the third party candidate was, she would say, well, if you vote for them, it's a wasted vote. And that stuck in my mind, because even at the time I said, who taught her that?
Yeah.
Because this is an 18-year-old, okay? This is not somebody who has new ideas, right?
They don't have decades of deep thinking and information gathering.
Right, as an 18-year-old. Somebody taught her that. And so even at 18, I looked at her and I said, who taught you that? Who taught you that if you voted for a third party candidate, it would be a wasted vote? And how many people have either thought that or been told that? And so we never really have a third party here in the United States, because anybody who really tries, well, that's a wasted vote. And so it's interesting to look at these little manipulations that people use to keep each other in check. Because that's the other piece of this, is that more or less we keep each other inside certain boundaries. There's an experiment that they did with monkeys, and this experiment is something that stuck with me too. So they took a group of monkeys and they put bananas, they put food on top of a ladder. And every time a monkey would try and go, and this is not cool as an experiment, by the way, but every time a monkey would try and get up the ladder to the bananas, somebody would spray them with a hose. Okay. Spray this poor monkey. Experiments sometimes are really terrible. So, and one by one, they replaced all of the monkeys in this cage until eventually there were no monkeys that had been in the original test group. But what had happened was, over time, when the monkeys learned they would be sprayed by the hose, every time a monkey would climb up the ladder, the other monkeys would pull them down off the ladder. And so every time a new monkey would come in, the new monkey would see the bananas and want to go up to it. And before anybody could spray them with a hose, the other monkeys would grab them down from the ladder. And eventually there was not a single original monkey left in that environment. And they would still pull any new monkey down from the ladder and had no idea why they were doing it. Because none of those monkeys had been sprayed with the water. So we do this to each other. We perpetuate serfdom in each other. We perpetuate compliance in each other.
Oh God, do we ever?
One of the things that,
you know, the Apple story.
I don't know this, but this is in part of actually one of the worst parts of human history that I can think of. When the Nazis invaded Poland, and I don't know if I'm going to get demonetized for saying that word, but when they invaded Poland, one of the things that my grandfather at the time, he said, was the thing that made him feel the most horrible is when somebody would come and rat out their neighbor for hiding Jews. And now we can look back and objectively say it was the right thing to hide them. It was the right thing to take care of the Jews. Like, it was absolutely the right thing to stop the madness, to do whatever you could to protect them and to stop the madness. But there were people, many, many people, who went and ratted out their neighbor for some kind of favor from the Germans. And
We saw one generation in China rat out their parents and their teachers.
yeah.
Even if the parents were good parents and the teachers were good teachers, they ratted them out.
And so there's part of humanity that's keeping ourselves in this too, right? It's part of seeing someone succeed and hating them for it, seeing someone succeed and being jealous for it because you don't have that in your own life. And that is a part in humanity that if you, whoever you are who's watching right now, pay attention to that in yourself. I think one of the biggest things we can start doing is forgiving people for the things that they have done us wrong, because all of us have had people do very wrong to us. Now, make sure that behavior stops, okay? Like, make sure you protect yourself, but then find a way to forgive. And if you think you can't forgive, I have watched people forgive the worst things possible.
Yes.
I've watched people forgive things that are
Atrocious sins.
beyond atrocious, okay? It is possible. And the other thing is to look at yourself in your own, are you expressed? Are you following your dreams? Are you doing the things that you want to in life? And if you see someone succeeding, cheer for them. Cheer them on. Even acknowledge them publicly if you can, but check what that is for you. What is the honest thing inside of you? Is it that you are not following the thing that you want to? Is it that you're not succeeding the way? Are you being too hard on yourself? Whatever it is, take and set that aside and say, I can be happy for this other person who is succeeding, because if they can do it, I can do it.
This is a genuine question.
Yeah.
Do you think that radical responsibility is really at the core of overcoming serfdom?
I think radical responsibility and the courage to be honest about the environment that you're in. So
yeah, I get it. Let me give you a perspective.
Okay.
Because I think a lot about these things.
Yeah.
Because of some reason, I don't even know why I think about them, but I must. And people kept saying, well, I have this problem.
Yeah.
And I came to this of, you have a situation, you want a different outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a problem.
Yeah.
If you're really taking on responsibility, you say, this is just something to go do.
Yeah.
If you frame it as a problem, it stacks a bunch of emotion on it.
Right.
As opposed to, I want an outcome where I'm free to self-express. I'm free to earn things for myself, and I'm free of the dictatorial aspects of government, of teachers, of everybody. I want real, genuine freedom of self-expression by learning who I am and owning my life through radical responsibility. Did that make any sense?
It did. And I think the blessing of being an adult, right? Because being an adult is very hard. It is very hard. But the blessing of being an adult is that you actually, and the blessing of the internet in a way, is that you actually have freedom to go be in environments that are better suited to you. So, and suited to your self-expression.
Right.
You don't have to stay at that job. You don't have to stay with the same friends. You don't have to talk to your family if they don't support the person that you want to become.
If they're toxic, you must be away from them.
And so it was interesting to me because one of the biggest shifts that I had in my 20s actually was the realization that although healing is deeply important, I have gone through enormous amounts of healing. That part of the issue was the environment. So if the food is toxic, if the society is toxic, if the people around you are toxic, part of what you have to do is get out of that environment. Go be in an environment. And this takes work because it takes being out of your comfort zone. Your comfort zone is the situation you're in right now. But looking to who do you want to be and who can you surround yourself with that'll actually support who you want to be. And yes, it is uncomfortable to go do this. I will never promise you an uncomfortable life. I will never do it,
But you can certainly have a higher quality one.
but you can have a
You know,
higher
maybe
quality
we could
one.
leave it at that.
That sounds great. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. We're 2 minutes over. Thank you, everybody. And if you want, I'll be reading the comments. So if you guys want to leave questions, I answer questions. So thank you guys, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.